They bury those deaths in their bottom line and they gag order these families. They don't want their stories coming out. You know, in the case of Karen Langhart and many of these families, they didn't take a dime. They didn't want money. They wanted their stories told and they want the labeling to be on the packaging just like cigarettes.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Mark Groves podcast. Today I feel like I'm in a bit of a teen throwback with just like an exploding amount of wisdom from Ricki Lake, so welcome.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm gushing a little. I'm a big fan of yours. I've been following you ever since my girlfriend did your Dating 101 series and she just swears by you and I'm just very happy to talk to you.
Well, I'm just really enamored by, one, first off, in my teens watching your show and then now getting to talk to you, you know, that you don't, when you're young and you see that kind of experience, you don't think one day you'll get the opportunity to speak to that person. So I'm pinching myself.
Oh, well, who that person was, you know, I was 24 years old when I went on the air with that show, which is so, I mean, the audacity for them to hire me, A, at that age, and B, for me to do that and think that I could, you know, that I knew who I was at that time. It's just, I've actually gotten a lot better in age. And so you're meeting the best me that I've ever been.
Well, you know, that's the thing is I just watched your documentary, The Business of Birth Control. You know, I feel like, well, the version of me that watched you at that time would never think that I'd have a podcast talking about these things either. So hopefully the two best versions of ourselves are about to have a conversation about some really important things. And, you know, the work that you're doing now, because I know you have, is it The Business of Birth? Is that the other one?
The Business of Being Born was my very first film that I made, documentary I made with Abby Epstein, my partner, 14 years ago.
Yeah, like you're doing really, really important work. And I'm curious, what has motivated this drive to educate in the reproductive space and, you know, more recently about the one on birth control?
I have to go back to when we started the first film, The Business of Being Born. So I, you know, lived in New York City. I was doing my show, you know, from the early 90s to 2004. But 2001, 9/11 was the huge turning point for me. I lived through that experience living downtown. I just had my home birth, water birth in my apartment in the West Village. And 2 months later, I had that experience of being in my primal power in my home, feeling safe in my home for one of the first times, because through my life, I never really felt safe at home. And 2 months later, I thought the world was ending. I watched the plane fly down the Hudson and hit the building. And it was in that moment that I had this epiphany. And I looked at my life. And I mean, maybe it sounds kind of, I don't know, but in that moment, I thought I was going to die, and I did not want my legacy to be just this talk show. Like I wanted to it was after that day that I soul searched and I thought, where can I make a difference? What do I stand for? Where I can be even more impactful? I looked at my birth experiences. My two, you know, sons were born, one in a hospital setting and one at home in my bathtub. And I was so impacted by my second experience that I wanted to make a documentary to explore choice and explore informed consent and really empower and educate women. And so I kind of found my life's work and my calling through this traumatic experience. And I ended up, you know, finishing the run of my show. I ended up leaving the marriage that I was in at the time, and I left New York City. It was like an epiphany I had in that moment on the roof of my building as I watched 9/11 unfold. And you know, making this documentary, this very personal film that I funded myself. It took 3.5 years to make. I show my home water birth in the film. And that gave me a sense of like really being able to express who I am and what I'm about. You know, I really am curious. I'm someone who's really curious about people and relationships and humanity. And I think, you know, when it came to my births, I just was so like, I evolved not just as a mother, but as like a woman, and came in touch with my true power in that moment. And I just wanted to share that as a way of educating women. I don't necessarily want women to do what I did. It's not about that. It's just, I wanted to explore this idea that we can be so empowered in those moments as opposed to having it taken away in many cases.
What is it about that process of home birth that really empowered you? Like, what was the sort of, maybe it's like the raw carnal nature of it, but what was it that the Ricki before and the Ricki after, there was that transition or the transformation or the light that came on or the whatever, the fire that got lit, you know, that you wanted other people to taste and experience?
I just felt like I could do anything. being pushed to that limit to save yourself. It's like, and I'd gone from, having my first son 4 years prior in a hospital. And granted, I had a healthy baby and a healthy mom. It was a very good outcome, but it was looking back at all the intervention, what I consider to be unnecessary intervention that was given to me that compromised things, that compromised my breastfeeding, my bonding. And so it was really like, I wanted to, have another child after having my first son, but I wanted to experience it differently. And I didn't know I was going to make a documentary. Like, I wanted to do a project that explored this, but it was really after I had both experiences that I could compare. It is sort of the seminal film that everyone continues to watch today. It's bigger now than it's ever been, and people are, even during COVID, so many people were clamoring for a home birth, out of hospital birth, because of the risk of getting infected. So, yeah, it became my passion. Like, I'm fascinated by the art of birth, and now with women's reproductive health with our new film. I just think, I'm all about informed consent, and there's just so much a lack thereof in every aspect of healthcare, particularly with women. So it's the work I love more than anything.
Yeah, and it's when we don't know, like you said, the first birth versus the second, being able to compare the two. Like, had you never experienced the second, you'd just think it's totally normal to have a hospital intervene, sort of drugged and whatever, maybe painkillered delivery. And I acknowledge as a dude, I can't conceptualize what that's like. I joked once with my partner and my partner's sister that the closest thing I could think of was like going to the bathroom and it being a bigger bowel movement. That's about it,
Being constipated and having pushed a
Yeah.
little baby out. Yeah.
Right. Like, I just thought, like, wow, that's not even close, but that's maybe the only.
They say a kidney stone. I hear like a kidney stone, passing a kidney stone, for a man to pass a kidney stone through their urethra. That is up there with childbirth.
Fearfully, I hope I never have to think about that. And I have so much reverence for the birth process. And I interviewed Holly Grixpall on here before about the birth control pill, and Dr. Nathan Riley about sort of removing the medical process from birth when obviously it's the medical intervention is not necessary. So in the process of exploring birth control, like, how did this come about?
Yeah, so now, and let me also say, Abby and I have made a bunch of documentaries together. So we made one in between about cannabis. So we have one called Weed the People, which looks at cannabis, the medicinal plant, and its effect on pediatric cancer. So we follow 5 children with brain cancer, different kinds of cancer, and while they're on cannabis oil, and also Western medicine. And that, again, it's about informed consent. It's about education, about re-education about this plant. With the business of birth control, so Holly Grigg-Spall sent the galley of her book before it came out to Abby, and it sat on her desk for about 6 months. And then Abby was coming. She lives in New York, so she was flying out to see me. We were doing some work on Weed the People. And she read the galley on the plane, and she's like, I think this is our next movie. And again, it's like this continuum of, it seemed really natural looking back on it now. Okay, we did birth, and now we're doing birth control. And there's a lot of parallels, a lot of similarities. And, I think Holly wrote a really provocative, brave book about, just her journey. Abby did a brilliant job on directing the film, and I'm super proud of it. And I think the timing of it could not be more perfect with what's going on with, women's rights being stripped left and right. And, it goes back to education. We need a re-education about these drugs that really compromise who a woman is foundationally.
Yeah, when I consider the conversation as a former pharmaceutical rep, I think about my friends and colleagues that used to sell birth control pill, and you never really thought much of it, when you're in the midst of promoting it. I even think about it as a teenager in my 20s, wanting a partner, wanting or having a partner on the birth control pill, which I get was really more about convenience and not really thinking, in having since left pharma. I remember one of the first things I started to question is like, wow, there's got to be a cost to taking these things, that we're preventing some sort of hormonal process. And that introspection really came from, one, looking at how cholesterol was framed to us in terms of public perception of fat causes high cholesterol. That was marketed to us. And also, I, at the time in my late 20s, took a drug for maybe 3 years or 4 years, I can't remember, that was for hair loss.
Propecia?
Yeah, it was like another version of that. It was called Avodart. This is not an ad. And I remember when I had left pharma, I started to look at, okay, well, why did I take this? Like there was a cost potentially to taking this just to keep my hair, and I thought, well, I'm ready to lose it if there is any price. I don't want to challenge my systems or like throw them off. And of course, naturally, that as soon as I started to hear the conversation about birth control, I just thought to myself, like, as I learned more about it and spoke about it and had conversations about it, one thing that became quite clear is quite a few people would get very reactive to the fact that we were just talking about, oh, well, your body doesn't think it's pregnant. Your body actually is in basically menopause.
Correct.
I remember getting a ton of pushback on that from women who were like, that's bullshit. That's a lie. You're propagating misinformation. Well, they didn't use that term then, but that's a very popular term now. And I was like, well, this conversation needs to keep happening because look at us. We're defending the very profit-driven businesses that are actually misinforming us through marketing. So I'm curious your thoughts on that and what were some of the most important or shocking discoveries that you had in making this documentary?
I mean, there's so many sort of head spinning things that come out of this film. And for me personally, so I'm someone who did take the pill for decades. I mean, probably 15 years off and on. I was also on I had the Mirena, which is the IUD that has the hormones. I didn't know it caused hair loss. I didn't know that that was a side effect. It was not told to me. So when I, went on the pill, I don't even think I was sexually active. I went for my pap smear and they offered it up free. So for me, it was about convenience. I didn't have to go to the pharmacy and fill a prescription. It was there. It was a stack of pills. They were really pretty. They were like colorful and neon colors. And it was like candy. It just felt like, oh, this is just going to, take away this worry of, preventing pregnancy and giving me great skin at the same time. I didn't know that it actually puts you in menopause. I was told it tricks your body into thinking it's pregnant.
Yeah, that's what I remember hearing.
And you don't get a real period. You're getting a withdrawal bleed, but you're not actually ovulating. You're not actually having a cycle. And, the other thing that really blew my mind is that it actually changes your pheromones. It changes who you are attracted to. Like that tripped me out. And Abby, my partner, because both of us were so green in this, we didn't put two and two together. We didn't question these drugs. We didn't ask about side effects. We weren't told anything. And to think that when you're a college student and you go on the pill and the cycle goes, you fall in love and then you marry and you start family planning and you go off the pill. I mean, there are countless anecdotal stories of women not being into their guy and it's scientific. Like I'm not very good. I'm the layperson. I'm not the expert or doctor, but there's been studies done where they did a t-shirt sniffing test somewhere
the white t-shirt study.
Yes. And they are actually drawn to a different scent when they're on these drugs. It's kind of like you're offline. Your hormones are offline when you're on these drugs. And it's like food for thought. I am not coming from a place of trying to scare women off of these pills. I just want to educate them so they know, okay, this can cause low-lying depression. This can change your libido. This can shrink your clitoris, There's so many things that I never, ever knew. And I just want everybody else to know so that they can make an informed choice when it comes to making these really important decisions about their bodies.
As you all know, I've had guests on the podcast exploring how to optimize the body, how to optimize the mind. I think about it in the context of my relationship to my performance and complementing my body or empowering my body through really good sleep and looking at things like adaptogens and nootropics and that kind of stuff. Recently, I've become aware of a company called Cured Nutrition, who I absolutely love. And there's a podcast episode with the founder named Joseph Sheehy, and he's an incredible guy. So I can't wait for you to hear the story of its birth. And one of my favorite products from them is a raw CBN nighttime oil. This oil has a 3-to-1 ratio of CBD to CBN, and it's just specially formulated to improve sleep quality and really promote that deep relaxation and a longer, more restful sleep. Now, each bottle contains 450 milligrams of full spectrum CBD, 150 milligrams of CBN, and natural terpenes that synergistically support relaxation, stress reduction, just improve sleep. And I gotta tell you, I absolutely love them. You just put one dropper full under your tongue 30 minutes before bed, and I've been feeling really deeply rested when I wake up. I'm getting some serious REM. My dreams are off the chain, and I love it. And this company, Cured, take a moment and really check out the episode that I did with the founder. This company, Cured, is perfectly in alignment with my values, the integrity I live by. I love the founder. I want you to check out that episode so you can learn a little more about them. And right now, Cured is extending an exclusive offer to you, my listeners. You can grab the CBN night oil or anything else that they have for 20% off. Just go to www.curednutrition, so CURED nutrition.com/createthelove and use the coupon code createthelove at checkout. So once again, that's CURED nutrition.com/createthelove. And again, use Create the Love, the coupon code at checkout to save 20%. Yeah, I remember learning about the effect of birth control on the study you're talking about, the white t-shirt study. And I remember them saying, smelling these t-shirts, and they would say things like, oh, it smells like my ex-boyfriend or something like that. When they looked at what they were drawn towards, they were drawn generally towards men who had immune systems that had a more diverse response, like an opposite response.
Right.
So that if you mated, you created more diversity in your immune system. And I remember in the film the narrator talking about how for people on birth control, they picked people who were like a sibling.
Right. It's like more like brother than other.
Yeah.
Which
yeah.
I mean,
well, you think about the effect on people.
Yes. And so Abby, who, she looks at partnerships she had, during those early years when she was on the pill, and she realizes like she chose those partners like she would have chosen otherwise, likely had she not been on the pill.
Yeah, when you think about the impact of that, or at least just to postulate that or consider that, because what I've found from your film is that, and I found this in just my conversation too with women about their experience on birth control, is there's a thought something's wrong with me because there's not an informed consent about a potential problem with the actual product they're be giving. Like you might experience these things, was not at least formally, or I don't even know if it's shared now, but it was not formally shared. You might experience suicidal ideation, depression, all this kind of stuff. And I know they say, well, it's in the package insert. Have you read the package insert? It's like 1-point font.
Yes, and there's families. We one of the sad, very, very sad parts of the film is we interview families that have lost their healthy, vibrant, young daughters to pulmonary embolisms and strokes from NuvaRing and Yaz and these drugs, and it's such a small percentage until it's your child,
Right.
And it's so tragic. And I'll share with you that one of the families, Karen Langhart was the mom who speaks up at the FDA. I don't remember what exactly it was called, but she gets up and speaks, and all she wanted was her daughter's story to be heard and for them to have labeling to save other girls. And she never got her day in court, and the mom actually tragically took her life and left money for us to finish the film. Like
Wow.
she was such a powerhouse and trying to do what she could to change the system and to save young women. And we didn't end up putting that end part of the story in the film because with testing, we saw that it took away from the storyline, or we had so much to cover in this film. That's one of the issues with it, is that, we wanted the racism piece in there. We wanted, the whole Margaret Sanger and the eugenics and the history of the pill and the studies done being on Black and brown women in Puerto Rico, and how a lot of the studies were, buried, that the results were buried to make it look like it was, safer than it was. And it's just, it's a lot to get in a 90-minute film. But Karen Langhart's passing was just one of the saddest things to be a part of in the making of this film. It's awful. It's awful. And again, it's like this weird line because, we don't want to scare women. We don't want to be fear mongering, but we want to shed light and pull back the veil so that everyone has access to this information and can make an educated choice for themselves.
Yeah, like you don't want to protect them from experiencing the dissonance or the pain that might come from the knowledge, but rather that expand the possibility of making an informed choice rather than what feels like an informed choice, but there's actually a whole bunch of information missing. And, one of the really powerful moments that I found in the film was the couple that was talking about their daughter who passed. And they just said, like, we used to trust the FDA and now we don't at all. And if you don't pay attention to pharma or the approval process, you might just assume that drug groups and drug approval processes actually have the consumer or the patient's health at the center of their decision making. I don't
Do
know that I
they? Do
actually think.
they?
Yeah,
Do they? I mean,
I
it's
don't
all
think they
about
do.
bottom line. It's bottom line. And, with these deaths of these girls, they bury those deaths in their bottom line, and they gag order these families. They don't want their stories coming out. In the case of Karen Langhart and many of these families, they didn't take a dime. They didn't want money. They wanted their stories told, and they want the labeling to be on the packaging, just like cigarettes.
Yeah, the black
And
box.
yeah, and I don't blame them. I mean, I don't know if I was 20 years old and about to, look at my options for birth control, would I have been swayed? Would I have not gone? I don't know what decision I'm 53 years old now, and I'm married to someone who had a vasectomy, and I still get a period, but I'm not worried about getting pregnant. But I would have liked the information. And for me, I struggled with hair loss. When I mentioned Propecia, I took Propecia for my hair loss, which is not approved for women to use, but that was my side effect that I dealt with from the pill and from genetics. And I'd wish I'd been told more. And so that's our hope in making this film and having this sort of gateway to this conversation starter. And we have a whole master class that we're actually releasing as well, which is like a 9-part in-depth, goes way, way deeper with every issue that when it comes to these drugs. If people want information about endometriosis and PCOS and what to do to get off the pill. How do you phase yourself off? Because that's a process. This really is like a great educational tool for women who want more information.
Yeah, when I was listening, I was just learning so much about fibroids, about so much of the crossover of there being a lack of education, but also a lack of awareness of environmental impacts and food and stress and all that kind of stuff. And the discussion about primary care physicians and them not really educating or being even aware of these possible side effects, like these young women coming to the doctor saying, I'm having this experience, and the doctor going like, nah, like
it's all in your head.
Right.
Yeah. It's maddening. And you look at the doctors and how they're set up with our health system. They don't get that time with their patient. They have to boom, 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 boom. And so the system is not set up. But I think, women need to advocate for themselves. It goes back, the birth film is the same way. You need to advocate, do the education, and understand that you have rights and choices that you can make. And that doctor doesn't always know best when it comes to you and your body.
It's so challenging though, because if you're young, you come from maybe a stressful home, maybe you're not being educated at your school about it. You think of the systemic challenges of being a physician in a system that's like this system where you're saying they don't have time. Their education generally, often post-graduation or post fellowships, is from interactions with pharmaceutical reps. And then you think about the patient, well, where is a patient educated on women's health? One of the beautiful parts of the film was the education where I was, they were talking about tracking your cycle. And I thought, wow, like what an empowering thing. And one of the women was saying like, that's feminism.
Right. That is true body autonomy. And that, yeah, it's the same thing like birth. For me, because I relate to all of this, that it's like flipping the script. For me, when I went to labor, when I was having my home birth, I wasn't afraid. People would say, oh, you're crazy. You're crazy. I couldn't wait to experience what labor felt like in the privacy of my own home with my care provider that I trusted. And I'd done the research. It's the same thing with this. I think it's like for me now, I relish that I still get a normal cycle, and I track it and I take notes, and it's like because I'm seeing for perimenopause, like where my body's at. And so if women can learn to appreciate, there is a reason we are more creative at a different time of a month. It's like, it's fascinating. This whole thing like seed cycling. I don't know if you know about that, but you can get really deep into the whole fertility awareness method, and it's scientifically, very successful.
It said 99%. I was like, damn.
But you have to, there's a learning curve. You have to learn your cycle. But I think that can be a really enjoyable process. And I wish I'd done that 20 years ago. I wish, so it's like, I feel like with this movie, it's like, it's for the next generation. And I think young people don't want to put endocrine disruptors in their bodies. They're super conscious about what they eat. So I think this is just the next level. And I think once we get to them and just show them how cool it is to kind of learn your cycle, I think it could be a new wave and a new movement. So that's what I'm hopeful for.
Well, and it's such true sovereignty. It's true autonomy. It's such a deep understanding of one's own body when someone tells them, no, that's not, or that, they're like, no, I fucking know. Like, don't, my partner, she tracks her cycle, and yeah, I get an email that tells me what part of her cycle she's in and what she might, it's like gives tips for that time in the cycle. And I'm like, we got to get one of these for dudes. How do we get this?
How do we do that? Let's start developing that. But they call it the fifth vital sign. There's so much that you can learn about your body and your medical history through tracking your cycle.
Like the fact that women's cycles oscillate around the circadian rhythm and the cycle of the moon. I mean, come on, like it's a portal.
Totally.
How can we not have so much reverence for the majestic sort of miracle that it is just that? Like that
Absolutely.
truth there alone is kind of like light some candles and let's celebrate, because it's pretty magical.
Totally. I'm with you.
What is some of the possible, I guess, solutions, or like, because you navigate them in the film, and to everyone watching this and listening to this, you must check it out. It's incredible. And I learned so much and was really inspired through it. So I'm curious, what are some of the, of course, what are some of the, like thoughts of how do we navigate through this and all that?
I wish we could say we tie it up in a bow. We don't really. I think it's about really imploring like the medical system to come up with more options, because, the fact is the pill is basically still our grandmother's pill. They repatent it to make more money, but they're not safer. They're actually more, they're less safe now because with each patent, I'm not exactly sure how it works, but the progestins, I'm going to butcher it but it's actually become less safe. And I think, there needs to be, there is talk about a male hormonal contraceptive that is coming down the pike that we're talking with about working with us. We need more options. And I think that it's going to take the public kind of clamoring for it, and fertility awareness methods is something I think maybe we need to come up with a new name, a new packaging for it. But I think with our masterclass, I think it could really serve a lot of people, both in this country and elsewhere.
Have they tested teaching this kind of stuff to like, grade, maybe like 11, 10-year-old boys and girls?
I think it's a great idea. I don't know with what's happening in this country. And I know you're Canadian, right? But you live in the States?
I kind of split my time. I've escaped Canada temporarily.
I'm not leaving Malibu, but Canada sounds really nice right now. I don't know with what's being, all of our rights are being stripped left and right. It's a very scary time, for just the idea of sex education. They're talking about, taking away these books in school. I don't know realistically what can be done, but people like Nathan, who, our friend who's an OBGYN that's not like any other doctor I know, it's people like that. It's people coming together with new innovative ideas to make it attractive and appealing to the masses.
Yeah, it's ironic to me that like one of the main conversations in the United States especially is this idea that abstinence will be what works, teaching people abstinence, which we know doesn't work. I mean, literally it works, but the education upon it doesn't actually empower anyone. There's no empowered knowledge about one's sexuality. There's just shame, and fear, which just continues to suppress people's voices and experience and expression. And they're not going into their sexual experiences fully embodied because they're afraid they're going to go to hell. Like screwed up is that.
It's crazy. And the Catholic right, have kind of tried to adopt this film, for their teachings. And it's just, Abby's at a speaking thing now in Orlando, and it's in a church, So I mean, we want to remove the religious aspect. This is about women learning their bodies, having true body sovereignty and autonomy, and being safe and preventing pregnancy. The idea that a woman can only get pregnant 3-4 days out of the month, and yet a man can impregnate a woman every minute of every day. It just seems to be just backward and wrong. And so I think it has to stop falling on the woman, and we need to, have men come up and take part in preventing these pregnancies.
Yeah, and boys learning that. Like, we all should be learning all about how ovulation works and pregnancy. And I mean, my class, I went to a Catholic school, which means the class that I got on sex ed was basically don't have sex or else you'll get pregnant and then you'll be kicked out of the church or shamed.
That's what
There
they
wasn't
taught. That was
essentially like that was the Cole's Notes version of it. They had a couple come in who had gotten pregnant. They must have been in their early 20s, late teens. And I was in grade 10 or 11 because I remember the class I was in. It was religion class. And I remember sitting there being like, this couple was essentially saying, don't have sex because you'll become like us. And then you'll have to give a talk, I guess, in front of kids. And I remember thinking to myself, like, wow, I don't align with this religion. Like, I don't align with what's going on right here. And yeah, that was the education, which is not an education. I learned how to use a condom from Degrassi, the show. The first one.
No.
Yeah. Not the one Drake was in, the very first, which no American has probably ever seen because it was very Canadian television. But that's how I learned. The guy put a condom on a banana and I was like, all right, that's how we do it. All right, perfect.
Wow, that's crazy. I'm trying to think of how I learned about sex, because I certainly didn't learn it in school, and I didn't learn it. And I was a late bloomer. I was super obese. I was not the kid that the girl that got the guys that were interested in me. I was the best friend that everyone came to tell, hey, tell your friend I like them, So I was a very late bloomer, and yeah, it's just we need to be learning. We need to be re-educating our young people. And I think the way to go to get to young girls about how cool it is to know your body, like the mucus that you check, when you're ovulating. I mean, it's fascinating that makes sense. It's this, this consistency of like an egg white, and that helps the sperm reach the egg. I mean, it's just a re-education, I think.
I was watching the film and they were using a speculum on, a woman was using a speculum on herself, like looking in a mirror, looking at herself. And I think teaching at one point, also a woman teaching it in a class, like via visual. And I was like,
were you offended by that in any way? Or did you find that like off-putting?
No. Maybe because I was a rep. So like all that kind of stuff never really, I always thought it was more educational. It wasn't like, it's sometimes hard in my younger brain. It would have been hard to not sexualize it, but now I'm able to sit there and be like, okay, that's the labia minora, the majora. And I thought when they were asking who here is ready to, maybe look at their cervix today. And I see kind of for a moment, you see like some people raise their hands and others not. And I thought, wow, that must be so interesting to be in this group learning about something. And I would imagine that most of the women in that group were in their like late teens, 30s. It seemed like a range. And I thought, wow, to be learning that in your 20s when it's such an important thing to know at 12.
Right. But at any age, I think it could completely change you in the most beautiful way, to like see how it all works, and to not be ashamed, and to just, I don't know if I've ever seen my cervix, but I certainly would like to, and I would be okay in a group now. Like I've very much evolved since my days of doing my old talk show. Like I was so close-minded back then about everything. I didn't come off that way, but I was deep down. I was super full of fear and judgment. And I think in my later years, I've just been like burst open, and making these films is definitely part of that journey.
So what is the part that you're most proud of in the film?
I mean, I love being able to just make these films that really are making a difference, and with this new film, it remains to be seen because it's brand new, but I can go back to the business of being born and seeing, I mean, it's now in like a medical journal. They've credited our film as being the single thing that has changed women seeking out of hospital birth and midwifery care. So
wow.
Like that, because
amazing.
It's so cool because I did that show for so many years, and I love that platform and that vantage point. But it was like that was the foundation, to have that mainstream audience that watched me twice a day, every day in their living rooms for 11 years. They trust me, they relate to me, they like me, they root for me. And so I'm able to really make these like pretty provocative, controversial films that are easily swallowed, I think, by the mainstream audience. And so that's really that makes me really, really happy and fulfilled.
Yeah, to think you go from like doing some shows that were like From Geek to Chic, which were
My
some of my
hoochie
favorite
mama,
shows.
blah, yeah.
Yeah, like I
But
think of like those were some of my favorites. The transformations, they'd come breaking through the picture, and I just almost see like you need to do your own breaking through of like from talk show to this depth and exploration of how these systems work, and to liberate us from like what we think is normal, what we think. That's the thing that keeps, I guess, in the last couple years especially, I've just been very fascinated. When I think about my time as a pharmaceutical rep, I remember walking with my friend whose father was actually he was one of my clients, or I guess like one of the physicians that I called on. And I had since left the industry, and I remember walking with her, talking to her, and she had become a friend. And I was just thinking like, wow, I was saying to her, I like actually created diseases, like I used to sell an irritable bowel syndrome drug. And at the time it launched, there was nothing for IBS. I remember educating family physicians on how to use it and how to identify a patient. And now IBS, I know, is so correlated to your nervous system being stuck in fight and flight, and it being more emotional and more trauma based. And I thought, oh my God, I like was teaching people how to find people to give this to. And now to look back and just start to see the many layers of the industry. Just a lot of people think I'm crazy for questioning a lot of pharma for the last couple of years, and just being, I've always been questioning of the vaccine, not saying that it wasn't useful or couldn't be used for some people. What was really alarming for me was that I wasn't allowed to explore the data and question it. Like that became a big red flag. I'd discuss it and someone would just call me an anti-vaxxer. And I'm like, wait, no, like how have you been convinced like 2 years ago or even 5 years ago, criticizing a pharmaceutical product after you're prescribed it would not be, you'd be celebrated for doing that. You'd be encouraged. And what I've just watched is we have generally been, just through media and public health, been encouraging, shaming those who question
and
it.
silencing.
It continuously happened in the film, the discussions about questioning the birth control pill, and it continuously being gaslit and silenced. And as you said, hush money. Like it's enraging.
No, it's, and for us, we have been, because it's a very fine line, because obviously feminism and because I consider myself to be a feminist, it's a nuanced conversation, because you have to be able to challenge what is out there, even though, yes, it made great strides for women to be able to control their bodies and make sure they weren't getting pregnant. But we need to do better at this point. And I think, when you saw Dope Sick, did that like resonate and give you chills down your spine? I can't even imagine, because
it was crazy.
Yeah. When did you sort of see the light when you were in that business? Like, was there like an aha moment of like, I don't know, what am I doing here?
It was when I was starting to study relationships on a much deeper level, because I was seeing the inflammatory side effect of dysfunctional relationships and conflict. I was starting to see the research on it, and the Gottman's research, as well as other research on wound recovery in high conflict couples, that it was impairing wound healing, like this kind of thing. And I was like, oh man. And then I started to learn about emotional dysregulation. And actually the thing that really made me start to question things was when I was about to leave the industry, and I went to a doctor, a naturopathic doctor, and I was just like, you know what, I'm going to get all my blood chemistry sorted. And it came back that I had elevated cholesterol. And so I was like, okay, interesting. So I go to a GP to go get a blood test, so I didn't have to pay for it in Canada. And he's like, I'm going to have to refer you to a lipid clinic. And I was like, first off, you haven't asked me, what am I eating? What's my lifestyle? My testosterone was elevated. He asked me if I was on a testosterone drug, which I was like, no. And I was like, why don't you ask me what I'm doing? And he didn't ask me about my lifestyle. So I dove deep into cholesterol because I wanted to understand it for myself. I used to sell statins, so I knew there were some challenges there. The veil got lifted. I went deep into the avenue of cholesterol, and I was like, holy shit, I was totally lied to as a GP rep. And I started to just see how when I was a rep, people would criticize the pharma industry, and I had your classic defenses of it,
What would you
and
say? What would you say in defense?
we're not profit driven. We're trying to help people. Profit just happens to be a side effect, and we had these other lines like, if someone said, oh, that drug has side effects, we'd say, well, one of the side effects is feeling better, right? Like when I watched what occurred in the last couple of years, and actually I relate a lot to the birth control film too, is that we would be given these objection handlers. So you'd be given, like, if you were selling a drug, they'd say, here's the objections you're going to get for this drug. And then they would give you, here's the answer to each one of these most common objections you'll get from your physicians or your nurses or your healthcare practitioners. And I noticed the same thing occurring in the last couple of years, where it was like, oh, there's no long-term data. And instantly people would be like, yeah, but mRNA has been studied for decades now. And I'm like, wow, it's like I was starting to see all these little pharmaceutical reps. And that's why the wake up was years ago. I think, like anything, once you start questioning, the
Can't go
veil's lifted.
back. Yeah.
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 I used to trust all these things blindly. I was part of it. I was part of the machine.
Me too. I mean, I was the daughter of a pharmacist. So my dad had his own pharmacy. I thought nothing of taking Tylenol codeine for my headaches. I didn't question
Me
it at
too.
all.
T3 really worked too. Let me tell you, like, goodbye headache, hello la la land.
Exactly. Oh, hello, good night's sleep. Yeah, I mean, it's this very strange thing. And I was so anti-drug when I was doing my old talk show. Like, I was the disciple of Nancy Reagan, just say no to drugs. And it's only now, full circle, that I'm way into plant medicine and psychedelics. I've done my ayahuasca journeys, and I've gone full circle, like, to being like sort of anti-pharma and just so open-minded about so many other things. Thank goodness.
Well, you start to see the overlay of lobbyist groups with political motivations, with, what's, I think, really just been very fascinating to me, especially in the last couple of years, is exploring how we get caught in binaries and beliefs and then can't dialogue about anything. We're witnessing this inability, like this instant villainization of any view that's not ours. And it happens on every side. That's the irony, is like both political extremes operate with the same behaviors. They just have opposing views.
Yeah, I was just listening to your last one on cancel culture and the whole thing. It's like, yeah, you can't go against the grain anymore safely.
No, it's like to question, it's virtuosity, or to present as virtuous. What I was really fascinated by in the research on that is that in the research, it's shown that people who present as virtuous are more likely to be deceitful, like to purchase counterfeit things, because they're more concerned about appearing virtuous than being virtuous.
It's all perception. Yeah, that's really that just sparks and makes me think of, like, my beautiful new husband who grew up Mormon, like devout Mormon, and it was all perception. Yeah. It's fascinating. Yeah, we were just watching the new documentary about the fundamentalist Mormons. The FDS, Fundamentalist Church of. I can't remember what
Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Yeah, Latter-day Saints.
LDS.
Exactly. But
I grew up with a lot of Mormons, and it was because I grew up in the southern part of Alberta, which runs along the I-15, which goes down to
Utah.
Yeah, and so it's called. It's one of many Bible belts, and I was always really fascinated by their, like, super love for family. I was inspired by that. But the hypocrisy that often occurred in our conversations, or they'd say they believe in something and they're like, they can't do this and can't do that, and then they're getting wasted and banging someone. And I was like, I don't care that you're doing that. But I've found too with Christianity, I pick often on Christianity, and maybe that's just due to my past as a Catholic. But I just found they would often say that this thing mattered to them, or they believed in it, but it would seem more convenient, It seemed more convenient. It feels like the ones who are most doubled down on their beliefs were the ones breaking the rules.
Absolutely.
Which shows you, again, that virtuosity, right? It's like, I know quite a few Mormons and Christians who had porn addictions, not saying, that that's always true, because everyone can experience porn addiction, but where there's so much suppression.
Right. There's got to be an outlet.
It's also psychologically interesting that we defend the things like birth control. We defend the things like cholesterol drugs. We defend the very systems that are actually influencing us and making profit from us. And I think people might think it's a conspiracy theory to believe that they want us sick or they want because it feeds profit. But, like once you start seeing how the systems work, I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I do think that they don't want us questioning the system, the status quo, and I think with birth, with my film, which I'm so excited for you to see, but it really, when we screened it, we screened it for grand rounds at the hospital where I had my first son and where Abby, my
Wow.
director, had her baby, and we thought they were gonna just like pat us on the back and say good job, and they screamed at us and called us propagandist filmmakers. They were like, you slandered us, and we simply were reflecting what actually is happening in a hospital system. But knew we were onto something in that moment when this little film was like sparking this. I mean, ACOG put me in their target resolution, said that it was the latest cause celeb, home birth, like attacking me. It was it was
Wow.
really, really a scary and fascinating experience to say, wow, we were like, we were poking a tiger, and certainly now we're poking tiger a little bit with big pharma. But again, it comes back to education, informed consent, advocating for yourselves, and making the choice that's best for you with the education needed to make one.
Yeah, I think of the challenge that your first film would have presented for OBGYNs, like here they are doing what they were taught to do, that it's the right thing, that, and in interviewing Dr. Nathan Riley too, him saying like if you consider it, physicians, just the ones who are the most successful, keep giving the right answer. They're not, he's speaking about themselves, like we're not rewarded for being critical of the very systems that already exist. And that is kind of a failure of the system. But I would imagine from an identity perspective, the reactivity of the OBGYNs, people involved in birth would be substantial.
Yes, yes, and a lot of the OBs didn't want the woman to be empowered in that way, and to say, "Wait a minute, why am I getting that drug? Wait, I don't want vitamin D or whatever given to my baby, whatever it is." It was getting in the way of them being efficient with their work, and we talk about the hospital system, and it's a business. They want those beds filled and emptied, a conveyor belt, and when you see the film, it's like it shows women giving birth on their own terms out of hospital, and standing up, catching their babies. I mean, it's images that a lot of people have never even imagined was possible. And so that film has been such a tool for so many people to just see things in a way they never thought they could before.
Well, I look forward to people experiencing it with this one too, the business of birth control. From a relational structure perspective too, whatever gives women more power, more tools, more sovereignty. It's interesting because there's almost like the old system or the old way of even relating believes that if the woman becomes more powerful, then the system itself or I become less powerful. I have to give up power, whether it's the male in the relationship or the system, as opposed to seeing that the more powerful each individual becomes in any system or relationship, the more powerful the relationship becomes.
Absolutely.
This is for everyone listening, must watch. And on all of our to-do lists is to also check out the one on birth.
I wanted to tell you, I know it's off topic, but I want to tell you, like I said earlier off camera, but I love the work you do about relationships and about finding love through yourself. And I've just been on this unbelievable journey of love and loss. I lost my second husband to suicide and bipolar disorder, and came to a place of like, went through just hitting rock bottom with that loss, and coming out of it, and just coming to a place in my 50s of loving myself, and now finding this my person, my king. And I have just been living the best of days, ironically, during this pandemic. I met him during the pandemic, and I feel like my story has been such a source of hope for so many people, particularly women of my age who are looking for love. And I appreciate all the things you put out in the world because it's really resonated with me. And I share it with so many of my single friends. I've implored them to take your course, even though I haven't, but my friend swears by it. But I'm a big fan of just spreading the word of just self-love and yeah, it's just you've been just great for me during this time.
Well, thank you so much. I as I said at the beginning, I think it's so funny to consider where I used to see you and now being able to share a conversation with you, and it really feels like a beautiful full circle, and just very appreciative.
Keep up the great work.
You too. And speaking of that, where can people find your films and more of you and all that jazz?
We are self-distributing this one because, as you can imagine, Big Pharma is tied up in everything. So we are doing it ourselves. It's at thebusinessofbirthcontrol.com, and people can stream it there. We're doing free streaming weekends. We're doing some stuff. We're planning to bring it through college campuses. So we want to do a fraternity tour. We have high hopes. And the masterclass series is also on that website, the business of being birthcontrol.com. And it's a 9-part series that I think is going to really, really do so much good for so many people in educating them.
Yeah. And for people who are listening who might want to stream it screen it, that's the right term, where would they reach out, or is that on the website?
They can go on the website as well, thebusinessofbirthcontrol.com. And that's the best place to find all of our films. But yeah, I'm super excited to just continue building a community and getting a conversation started to hopefully promote some change.
Amazing. Everyone listening, share this far and wide. Make sure that you check out the documentary and all of them. And if you're interested in screening it, that's on the website too. Ricki Lake, it is such an honor.
Mark Grove, such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode. If this episode resonated with you, one of the best ways to support the show is to go subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss any more. Leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to it, or share the episode with your community on Instagram or whatever social place you like to hang out. This helps get it into more people's ears, and I'm so grateful for your support, always. Thanks again for tuning in. Much love.